All right, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna run these two clips that we got for the second live stream. First up, we got a shout out to Mr. Charlie Kirk. Everything you need to know about Trump's federalization of DC. We covered that live today here on the live stream earlier this morning, and then we'll switch gears and go to Coleman Hughes. How embracing woke sunk the Democrats and what comes next. Hey, so it's saying how embracing woke, how embracing the whole woke, term, how it sunk the Democrats and what comes next. So I believe this is I think this is the one where he talks about can the Democrats win back America. Yeah, that's the one.
Welcome to another episode of
Conversations with Coleman. So I'm gonna go right here with that. And we'll be done right there. All right, so let's jump into the first live stream, guys. Make sure you're good before you take this news in. It can be triggering. If you're not, come back later. If you are, welcome to the live stream. So let's take a listen. Charlie Kirk, everything you need to know about Trump's federalization of DC. If you guys want to see that, I live streamed it earlier this morning. Trump went live around 10:30 a.m. So I got the entire live stream. We had President Trump talking. A.G. Bondi spoke. Kash Patel spoke. I can't. This lady who is from the Five from Fox News. Her name, it'll come back to me, but there was quite a few people that spoke. I thought it was a good press conference. He spoke about DC, him taking charge of basically federalizing it, and a little bit about Putin. So let's listen.
President Donald Trump took to the press briefing room early on a Monday morning to make the announcement, saying that enough of this crime and the third worldification of Washington, D.C., we're not going to put up with it. Let's play cut 304.
Today we're declaring public safety emergency in the District of Columbia. Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's fantastic, is taking command of the Metropolitan Police Department as of this moment.
I took two things that I love, dancing and dogs, and I made them into a successful business. Hi, I'm Ronnie.
And I'll be making the appropriate notifications to Congress.
Now, the 1973 Home Rule Act for D.C. explicitly allows the president to take control of Washington, D.C. police for 48 hours. No questions asked. As long as he believes that, quote, special conditions of an emergency nature exist. President Trump says that's the case and that D.C. has a public safety emergency. Now, in addition, the president can keep D.C. police federalized for up to 30 days as long as he notifies Congress and explains why. Right now, 30 days is the cap, unless Congress passes a new law that said it's not clear that anything that stops President Trump from controlling the police for 30 days, surrendering power for a day, and then federalizing them again. But there may be other arguments. Mike Davis was recently arguing that DC Home Rule Act itself is unconstitutional. We'll have to wait and see what the arguments are there. But the legal questions aside is, why is Trump doing this? You could say quite reasonably he has a lot on his plate. He's going to go, by the way, sit down with Vladimir Putin in Alaska this Friday. He's trying to fix Gaza. He's doing deportations and tariff negotiations and a lot more. So why is he looking to micromanage the nation's capital? Ronald Reagan ignored our nation's capital. George W. Bush ignored our nation's capital. Bill Clinton ignored our nation's capital. George W. Bush ignored our nation's capital. Barack Obama ignored our nation's capital. And Joe Biden ignored our nation's capital. Why? Because it's easy to ignore our nation's capital. It's just homeless people, slums being slums, and slumlords being slumlords, and it's okay if it has a higher crime rate than Mexico City and Bogota and Islamabad. No, it's actually not okay. President Donald Trump has always been a person very aware of symbolism. He's very visual. He cares a lot about the trappings of the presidency. That's why he likes putting on the military parade this summer, one that I supported. It's why he wants to build a big ballroom on White House grounds. A great nation should have a great presidential ballroom.
Oh, Lord.
So it really impacts President Trump to see the reality of our nation's capital city. We're supposed to be the world's greatest superpower, the leader of the free world. So why is our capital a joke, a mess, a disgrace? In 2023, Washington, D.C. had 274 murders in a city with a population of only 700,000 people. That's a murder rate of 39 per 100,000. That's nearly the murder rate of South Africa, where we're now taking refugees from, just so we're clear, and we should. In 2024, murders were down, but the murder rate was still 27 per 100,000. That's higher than the murder rate of Mexico, and it's 4 times the US national average. Even if crime is dropping, the lower rates are still a complete and total humiliation and disgrace. Let's play cut 307.
We're formally declaring a public safety emergency. This is an emergency. This is a tragic emergency. And it's embarrassing for me to be up here. You know, I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia on Friday. I don't like being up here talking about how unsafe and how dirty and disgusting this once beautiful capital was, with graffiti all over the walls. It's another part of it, by the way. Because we're talking about safety, we're also talking about beautification. We're the most beautiful, potentially, capital in the world. We always had. But people come from Iowa, they come from Indiana, they come and then they get mugged. Not gonna happen. Keep coming, because by the time you get your trip set, it's gonna be safe again, and it's gonna be clean very quickly.
Think of all the high schoolers that go to Washington, D.C. for the first time. What are we putting on display? Why is it that Tokyo, New Delhi, Havana, Cuba are safer than Washington, D.C.? Substantially safer. You can walk the streets of Tokyo at night. You can walk the streets of Seoul, South Korea at night. You can walk the streets of Kuala Lumpur. You can walk the streets of Singapore. But the fact that you cannot walk the streets of Washington, D.C., or New York City or Chicago is an indictment and a failure of our ruling class. Our ruling class has cared more about sending javelins and missiles to Ukraine while they have to walk over drug overdosed bodies on the way to go make a vote on the Senate floor. I want to play another piece of tape here of President Donald Trump announcing the takeover of Washington, D.C. And understand this, you get what you put up with. There are political issues you can control, and there are political issues you cannot control. And what is most frustrating about the current American moment is that we are overwhelmingly met with political issues that we can control. Our failure is an act of the will or a lack of the will.
Are you like the millions of Americans who have recently opened up their auto insurance bill only to ask the question, what the heck?
When it comes to crime, we saw this on the southern border. All you had to do was make a decision that you wanted a border. We were told by James Langford from Oklahoma, well, you know, we need to have some bipartisan deal that allows 5,000 people a day to come across. Wrong. You need to have the willpower. You need to dive deep and dig deep to have the fortitude, the wherewithal, the spine, the cojones, the chutzpah to achieve what you want to achieve. And we've just put up with crime for the last 40 years because we're afraid of being called racist, because, you know, youths are going to do youth things. Crime is a choice. Putting up with crime is a choice. We don't have to live like this. Let me repeat one of my core political philosophies. This is not Republican or Democrat. If you cannot walk the great American cities at night safely without having to look over your shoulder, then your political leaders should all be fired. That ruling class has failed. I don't care if they're Republican, I don't care if they're Democrat. Degradation is a choice. And it's time for us to clean it up. And the liberals, they have no idea how to respond to this. Oh, Donald Trump's a racist. That doesn't work anymore. It's not 2016. Oh, Donald Trump's a fascist. That doesn't work anymore. It's not 2020. What new talking point do you have? What is your objection to rolling in the tanks, bringing in the drones, sending the Marines? What is your objection exactly? Do you not want to live in a safer city? Deep down, they're cheering for him, by the way. Deep down, a lot of these libs actually want this to happen. But on television, they're going to performatively say this is the wrong thing. It's time for us to get aggressive on crime. We need more people in jail. Write that down. We do not have enough people incarcerated in America. We need mass incarceration. People always say, oh, we have a mass incarceration problem. We have an under-incarceration problem. We just happen to be a very violent country. Get over it. Put them in jail for life. If you're You're going to start shooting up schoolyards. You're going to start getting kids caught in crossfire. A job of a political leader must be the safety of their citizens. If you're a mayor of a major city, your job is to police the streets, to fix the streets and clean up the homeless. And since Muriel Bowser is not done her job in Washington, D.C., the tanks are going to be rolling. Play cut 309.
We're going to be removing homeless encampments from all over our parks, our beautiful, beautiful parks, which now a lot of people can't walk on. They're very dirty, we got a lot of problems. But we've already started that. We're moving the encampments away, trying to take care of people, and getting rid of the people from underpasses and public spaces from all over the city. There are many places that they can go, and we're going to help them as much as you can help. But they'll not be allowed to turn our capital into a wasteland.
Washington, D.C. has become a dumping ground for the third world and a safe haven for criminals. That is our nation's capital. We're not talking about the liberation of Toledo, Ohio, of course, which we should try to liberate all American cities. This is not the liberation of Portland, which we should do. This is our nation's capital. And do you know how disgusting it is when I drive the streets of D.C., and you pass the Saudi embassy, for example, big, beautiful building, and there's just homeless encampments all around it. It's embarrassing. So we have to accept that the sheiks of Qatar and the ruling class of Saudi Arabia and the prime minister of Japan, they see what we see, and it's humiliating. They see this. We're supposed to believe that these foreign leaders, you go down Embassy Road in Georgetown, you go down Embassy Road in Washington, D.C., you got one after, you got Spain, you got Portugal, you got Croatia, one after the other, boom, boom, boom. They see the graffiti. It's not a good look for a superpower. And we're just supposed to put up with it because we're afraid of being called a racist. That dog doesn't hunt anymore. This is President Donald Trump saying, once we liberate DC, and by the way, I guarantee the crime's gonna go whoop, it's gonna go way down. And then the media will say, oh, it's only going down because he brought in the military. Exactly. We need full military occupation of these cities until the crime desists. Period. We need a desisting of crime in our cities. We're not gonna put up with it. I wanna be able to walk Magnificent Mile in Chicago without having to look over my shoulder. Do you know crime is so bad in Chicago that if you get a fender bender, there's a new thing that the youths are doing. Remember, we have a big teenage problem of crime in our country, that teenagers will bang the back of your car as a fender bender. You come out to go trade insurance, and then they steal your car. In Chicago, the new guidance is that if you get a fender bender, drive to the nearest police station to trade insurance just in case they're there to steal your car. It's a real thing. It's happening all the time. By the way, get a burner. We advertise it all the time here on our program. I don't want to live in that country. You shouldn't either. Simple fix. You steal a car, 25 years in prison. I don't care if you're a teenager. I don't care. Well, I was raised without a dad. Well, you're going to meet a new dad in jail. We're done. We're not putting up with it. We need more prisons, and we need more prisoners. Enough of this. I honestly, I was once part of this whole prison reform thing. I look back at it, and I just cringe at myself. It's a totally wrong premise. We are soft on crime in this country. We need discipline. Honestly, we need the humiliation of criminals. We need order. You don't live in a nation if you can't walk the streets of San Francisco at night. You don't live in a country when young teenage girls can't walk the streets of LA. How is that a free society? You are appeasing the criminals. Stop coddling criminals because they happen to be a protected class. We don't believe in protected classes anymore, by the way. We're done with that. Game over. No more protected classes. We are all citizens made in the image of God. Oh, you're a protected class because, a different skin color. Ain't wrong. That regime was defeated back in November. That whole worldview was gone, over, done, kaput, sayonara. Instead, a new worldview has ascended, which is we're not going to make accommodations for criminals. We're going to do mass deportations. If you're black and you commit a crime, you go to jail. If you're white and you commit a crime, you go to jail. Human equality. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter your background. We are all treated equal under the law, and that is a biblical principle. So once we liberate Washington, D.C., and we will liberate it. Now again, I want to say, President Donald Trump, he's got to go play to win here. The one piece of caution we'd have to say is that if we just kind of do this symbolically, we will lose. The criminals will win. We got to go hard. We got to go big league. We're talking National Guard, tanks, every street you need military. And if people are afraid, oh, well, Donald Trump is a fascist because he's bringing in the military. Well, you're an anarchist. We're not fascists. We're order. Call them a name right back. You're an anarchist. You want the criminals, the thugs, the gang members, and the worst of society to run the streets of DC. We're not going to put up with it. By the way, spare me the lecture. You guys militarized Washington, D.C. after January 6th, but you wouldn't move them a couple blocks north to the criminals because you acted as if, oh, all the people on January 6th are the greatest threat ever because they went in with a pocket constitution to go say a prayer in the U.S. Capitol. Once we liberate D.C., you better believe it. Chicago, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Portland, San Francisco, we got a big military. We should be willing to use it. Play cut 316.
And we're going to have the same thing here. But then I'm going to look at New York in a little while. Let's do this. Let's do this together. Let's see. It's going to go pretty quickly. And if we need to, we're going to do the same thing in Chicago, which is a disaster. We have a mayor there who's totally incompetent. He's an incompetent man. And we have an incompetent governor there. Pritzker's an incompetent. His family threw him out of the business, and he ran for governor. And now I understand he wants to be president. But I noticed he lost a little weight, so maybe he has a chance. You know, you never know what happens. But Pritzker's a gross incompetent guy thrown out of the family business.
It's never been easier to start a podcast than with Riverside. Here's how it works. First, go to riverside.fm and open an account. And then you'll be able to capture high-quality video and audio from practically anywhere in the world. When it comes to editing, Riverside is perfect for beginners. Even if you have zero experience, you can use their AI tools and intuitive editing features to create a professional-looking result. You can get transcriptions automatically and use them to edit like a doc, or you can use the chapter timeline feature, which makes it way easier just to skim and scan. Ready to share? Well, it's okay if you don't have an audience yet. Everybody starts somewhere, and Riverside has perfect tools to help you grow your audience, like live streaming if you're into that, or you can use their AI tools to create automated short clips that you can post on YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, and TikTok to increase your engagement. Your podcast really is just one click away with Riverside. Just bring your idea, we'll do the rest. Try it now, it's free.
Killing me, YouTube.
J.B. Pritzker was born on third and thought he had trouble. If your city is a third world hellhole, look at that. He's a mile wide, J.B. Pritzker. I always laugh, I'm going to run for president. As I say commonly, I would love to see that. The running part. We need an El Salvadorian reset. El Salvador went from the most dangerous country in the Western Hemisphere to one of the safest, if not the safest. Crime is a choice. We are deciding and choosing to put up with it. We are deciding and choosing to allow our streets to be littered with criminals and the worst of society. And President Donald Trump is saying no more. He is exercising his willpower. And Brandon Johnson, Muriel Bowser, Karen Bass, Mom Donnie, if he's going to be the next mayor of New York City, watch out. This is what we are elected to do. Crime is a choice, and we want the streets of America to be as clean as Tokyo. Joining us now is Editor-in-Chief of Breitbart News to go over a variety of topics, but the breaking news today is the federalization of Washington, D.C. This really seemed to have been triggered by the young man working for Doge being mugged, but President Trump has been alluding to this for a couple months. He's been talking about how D.C. has become a slum. D.C. is a third world city. Alex Barlow, your take on President Donald Trump federalizing our nation's capital.
I love it. I lived there for a while, Charlie, and we have a mechanism to help save the city, which has been overrun by Democrats and thus crime vandalism. It is an embarrassment. It's a national disgrace. The city has a lot of potential. It is where people convene, like it or not, just by nature of the fact that it's our nation's capital. It is the city that is broadcast to the world as the most representative of the United States, like it or not. A lot of days not, but that's just the reality. And it's one of these places where if we do this right, we could have a safe, beautiful capital that the world admires. And Donald Trump has a keen eye for this stuff. He has a mechanism to change it. So why wouldn't he? This is the outside the box thinking that I love about Donald Trump, because why would he tolerate something that's second tier in America? He's a cheerleader for this country. And if you look at the way DC has gone in recent years, it's gotten more crime out of, more dirty, and somehow more expensive at the same time. It's totally unpleasant to go there. I used to live there and I used to love living there. It's been the center of the world for so long. Really, since Barack Obama, it's kind of been the center of the world. Let's go clean it up and let's get some points doing it.
Well, and look, exactly. So they're already calling him a fascist, all this, blah, 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 whatever. We don't care. This is about a nation's capital. By the way, if you go to Singapore, you go to Tokyo, you go to Seoul, South Korea, you go to any of the great Asian capitals, they wouldn't put up with what we have here at all, period, whatsoever. And why have we put up with such crime, endangerment, slum activity all throughout? And it's a combination of not just the homelessness and the drug use and the maniacs, because I was just in DC recently and it was just a bunch, it was terrible. But also, it is a very violent city. Why have we put up with it for so long?
Okay, so it's a one-party town. So the Democrats run the city. So if they choose to start actually prosecuting crimes and they start trying to hold people to account and to not release all the criminals onto the streets, then what that's going to lead to is a short-term uptick in crime statistics, which is bad. That's an admission of failure. So they're never going to do that. So politically, they have to allow for all the crime to continue, because to address it would necessitate admitting that it was bad to begin with. They're never going to do that because the left is so political. They would rather see crime than have a short-term, hit in the polls over this issue. The other thing is the left, they love chaos. They're agents of chaos. They don't want to see a law and order society. They don't want to see our nation preserved and conserved in terms of the values you and I champion on a daily basis, Charlie. So they're not going to be the ones to take the initiative. The only chance you've got is conservatives or Republicans doing it from the perch of the presidency, to be honest with you. And any prior Republican president that we've had in my lifetime would never have been able to fight through any of the name calling and the outrage and the hand wringing that we're about to witness. But it doesn't matter. Trump's got to soldier through and he's going to get this done.
Talk about the politics of it. How will this be received politically, where the media will call him a fascist, home rule, and all that? And also, no one's talking about the tourism angle. Hundreds of thousands of young kids visit Washington, D.C. every year on school trips, high school trips, middle school trips. We want them to see something they're proud of, and it does something to the psyche. I could say this as someone who's been to D.C., Alex, numerous hundreds of times. When you get out of Reagan and you drive through, or Dulles, where you fly in, and you just see slums and you see tents, and it brings down your soul.
It really does. So I lived in the Foggy Bottom area for about 4 years or so, and my typical day, I would involve me rolling out of my apartment, running down to the Lincoln Memorial, running along the Potomac River, running through iconic Georgetown with the cobblestone streets, on Prospect Avenue, which was, from the scenes from The Exorcist. I always loved used to doing that in the fall. It was such a blast, Charlie. By the time I left, it was Black Lives Matter time. All the stores were boarded up. Everyone was bummed out because of stupid coronavirus masks. There were riots all the time. There were people marching down the street, making all sorts of noise for no reason. There's no reason it has to be that way. It wasn't that long ago that DC was at least tolerable, and we can make it beautiful again. We can make DC great again. I mean, it's a cliche for a reason. We can absolutely do that. Trump's got the power to do it. And I'll tell you, if he succeeds, he'll get a lot of credit. Because even people on the left, I think, will admit to some degree that this could be done, and the people in charge now will not address it.
We have long said here on this program, the future of MAGA and the future of this movement will go through the reclamation of our major cities. That doesn't mean we have to make New York MAGA or LA MAGA, but you must be able to have dominion and control and authority over America's greatest cities. If we want to just be an outskirt movement, look, if we want to just control the Midland, Texas, the Oklahoma cities, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's incomplete. It is incomplete because then basically you are the master of the hinterlands, which again is not an insult, beautiful parts of the country, but we need to go into the fire. Is it time then, Alex, if we have a successful model in Washington, D.C., to replicate this in other cities? It's a little bit harder, obviously, because you have home rule designation in D.C., but is it time for us to start to roll in the tanks to Chicago? Is it time for us to sign the Insurrection Act in Los Angeles? What are we putting up with and why? Talk about how this might be the entry point to a broad reclamation project of the third worldification to liberate New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia, LA.
I'll talk philosophically, and then I know some lawyers are going to have to back me up on the legal side, because I know how much of this could actually get done. But from my perspective, it doesn't make sense that we have the strongest, most advanced, most technologically savvy fighting forces in the world, and yet we allow for our cities to be war zones. It doesn't make sense to me. And I'm not saying that we want to have, a massive military presence in our city, because that'll defeat the purpose of what I'm talking about anyway, which is that I would like for our cities to be a place where culture is thriving, not where people are fearing for their lives when they walk down the block to get a sandwich. So, but the point is that if we have resources that are able to clean up some of these problems, maybe it's the fentanyl issue because it's connected to the illegal immigration. Maybe it's what they're doing with ICE in Los Angeles. Maybe that's the place to start. But I would look for opportunities around the edges at first, and then maybe broader from there to try to set the standard that in this country, we have great, thriving cities. I'll tell you, I live a suburban life where I walk to school with my children, and I don't live near a major metropolitan center. But I'll tell you on weekends, Charlie, when you want to eat and shop, you go down to the city, and you're fearful there. They have better restaurants, but you're worried about whether or not something is going to happen to you when you're in your car. If someone's going to break into your car. That shouldn't be the case in this country. We should have a higher standard than that. And for Republicans, we can't just opt out. We have to be part of the solution.
And part of that is
nice art. It's really good. Actually, it's really good. Hey! Hey, give me back my pizza!
We just destroyed this classroom for that video. Be sure to watch Sketch in theaters on August 6th.
Here's how I aced my midterm project with Adobe Premiere Pro. Beautiful shots. But too noisy, right? Enhanced sound fixes it. And bam, just like magic. And done.
the concern of the major cities. Can you speak to those? Some people would say, Alex, in our audience, forget it. Let New York be New York, let LA be LA, not our problem. Why is it our problem? Why is, if we are articulating the domestic MAGA doctrine, this nationalist populist project that you and I have been under, working on 10 years, why do the cities matter? And how do you respond to a skeptic? They're blue, they're Democrats, let it burn. How do you respond?
Yeah, first of all, I think the premise of the city, even though I don't like some of the walkable cities, some of the green stuff, and some of the hideous architecture in a lot of our modern cities. So there's a lot of negative stuff I can say. But overall, when a lot of us think nostalgically at our favorite era of America, it wasn't just because we had great government, it's because we had great culture. And a lot of that culture does take place in the cities, and that's exported around the world. And I think that that's generally a good thing in a vacuum. And so to abandon the cities is to abandon the opportunity for us to be the cultural leaders on the earth. So I think that that is a major premise. But another thing is more of a practical human populist level, which is that a lot of jobs, you need to either be in a city or be in proximity to a city. Not every job, but a lot of them do. And so to act as though we don't care is to abandon parts of our coalition, abandon a lot of MAGA voters. If you look at California, we've got a lot of horrible cities, but we've got the highest volume of MAGA voters of any state. It's not enough to win elections yet, maybe one day, but there's so many of us here who have the same values as you, who are living a peaceful suburban or rural life. So I don't think you should abandon your fellow man, because a thriving American city provides economic opportunity, provides cultural opportunity, and I just like the idea that we want to be excellent. We want to raise the bar. That should be the standard for America. We should try to be excellent in every possible way.
Yeah, and that's part of the entire federalization of Washington, D.C., because it's also the nation's capital. And it's gotten so much worse throughout the years. And then the good people like you leave. The good people like Benny Johnson leave, and what are you left with? You're left with criminals and wokies. And criminals and wokies, they don't make a good city. They do not. It is a symbol of national decline. We need to go back to the 1990s, where we had tough on crime type policy. The Democrats like Karen Bass and Brandon Johnson, and I want to talk about Mamdani and how this all ties into the next segment. They're going to respond just by weaponized name calling, obvious subversion of this. But I hope it is a contrast for anybody listening. It should be unacceptable if you cannot walk your great cities at night. Unacceptable, period. You can walk the streets of Tokyo at night. You can walk the streets of Seoul, South Korea. You can walk the streets of Singapore. You can walk the streets of Kuala Lumpur. But why can you not walk the streets of Washington, D.C.? Because our leaders chose it. 30 seconds, Alex. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I love your point that it's a symbol of national decline. Are we a society with high standards and believe in excellence, or are we not? And it is obviously a symbol that things are going the wrong direction. One of my favorite refrains is, how's it going? Or how are we doing? When we experiment with things, are we feeling better about things after we've done them for a few years? And if the answer is no, then why not run in the other direction? You're going to be a highly motivated person to try to solve these problems. They're hard problems, and a lot of the people there don't want them solved, unfortunately. But that's no reason to stop. We got to keep trying. We got to make our cities excellent again.
Let's play this. This is George Will on Bill Maher talking about blue cities and how he hopes that Mamdani wins in New York. You see, this is an old, archaic, relic way of thinking about politics. Oh, once we hit rock bottom, people will realize it. There's some truth to that on the national scale, like Biden gave us Trump. There's actually the opposite data to show that in cities. They just get bluer and more dysfunctional because the decent people leave. Play cut 313.
And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
I want him to win.
You want him to win?
Yeah. I think every 20 years or so.
Wait.
We need every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again.
This is a failed way of thinking. If that's the case, people would have learned their lesson in Chicago. Nope, the suburbs of Chicago became bluer. They would have learned their lessons in Philadelphia. They would have learned their lessons in LA. They would have learned their lessons in San Francisco or Portland or Seattle or LA. None of that is true. Some people, like George Will, he just loves losing. It's a cope. It's always tempting, but then you get good people who flee. Alex Marlowe. Alex, you are muted, so I don't know if that's on your end or my end.
It's mine. I'm sorry, Charlie.
My
first take is, what's George Will doing? And why is he out there? I had enough of George Will when I came in his business 17 years ago. It's just, Mark gets all these great guests. Why George Will? I guess, I don't know, maybe he got what he wanted for it because everyone's playing this clip.
I will say one thing about George Will, though, before we go.
Yeah.
He hasn't aged a day. I got to tell you, it's actually pretty remarkable. Keep going.
He looks like he's in his late 70s now. He looked like he was in his late 70s 40 years ago also. So he does have that strange look. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know why. I don't think anyone's listening to him, but it's an interesting thought exercise with Mamdani in particular, because the nature of the rest of the field is that it feels like Andrew Cuomo is just such a uniquely horrible candidate. And this is what disturbs me about this whole race, is that Curtis Sliwa seems like a nice guy, who runs every time, doesn't win. And then Eric Adams seemed like he actually was amenable to coming around to a lot of what Trump is doing, and he's polling at literally nothing. Like, he's getting almost nothing in the polls, which is very disturbing to me. So, Charlie, do you have this mapped out in your head? Because this is one that gets confusing to me by the day. We all know Mamdani is a He's a charlatan. He is a fake. He's not who he says he is. He's a avowed communist. I mean, these are scenes and things of production. This is true communism. He's got those strange toilet bowl white teeth, but you never get that in communist society. You can only get that in capitalist society. So he's a very strange person overall. But Cuomo, you see what he's going to do? He wants to now kick the rich people out of their rent-controlled houses. But the problem is everyone's broke in New York anyway because it's too expensive. That's not a good idea. He's got all these terrible ideas. So who's going to run the place?
Well, a bunch of bureaucrats will end up running the city. And look, the point is this. There was a guy named Coleman Hughes. Is that right, Blake? Yeah. Coleman Hughes from Detroit. His stated political idea, his mission, was to drive the good people out of Detroit so that he hung on to power. This is what George Will doesn't understand, is that there are some people that will govern. They will govern in a way. Coleman Young, not Coleman Hughes. Thank you, Blake. Coleman Young, I was close. Coleman Hughes is a writer. Coleman Young, that's why I got it confused. Coleman Young was the mayor of Detroit, and his stated goal, well, not stated, but his whole idea, it would get revealed later, was that basically make it so unpleasant, but I hold on to power. I will rule over the ashes. I will be the mayor over a destroyed city. I will be a mayor over Dresden after the bombing. It will be a terrible place to live, but I'm in charge. I'm the mayor. And that's what Mom Donnie will do.
It's not too late to outgrow the family hairline. Through Hims, you can break the cycle and get the thicker, fuller hair of your dreams. Genetics started it, but our range of personalized treatments can help you get ahead of it. Stop hair loss and regrow your hair in just 3 to 6 months with clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil. See why 79% of customers say they wish they started treatment through Hims earlier. Take control of your own hair destiny. Start today at hims.com.
Unlock the world's largest, most liquid financial market with Forex.com. Forex, or FX, involves trading one currency for another. It's a big deal with a daily turnover of $7.5 trillion. Forex markets are super liquid, ever-changing, and available 24/5. That means one thing: potential trading opportunities. Discover these potential opportunities with Forex.com. Explore 80+ FX pairs and act decisively with leading platforms.
All right. That was the one from earlier today. See, you have everybody up there. A.G. Pambandi, Cash Patel. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next clip where we got the conversations with Cole. We won't watch much of this. This is over now. We're only probably going to go like 20 minutes in, so we're going to take a listen. You guys can head over to Coleman's channel to watch the remainder of the episode, but we're going to go about 20 minutes in.
Thanks so much for coming on my show.
Thanks so much for having me, and congratulations on the new digs at the Free Press.
Thank you. So we've been bumping into each other for years, mostly at the Olive Tree Cafe, really for the past 5-6 years. But give my listeners a sense of who you are, how you got into political analysis and polling, and what you're up to now.
Who are you, and what on earth are you doing here?
Yes.
So I started my career in political analysis and data in particular at 538 in 2015. So about a decade ago. And at the time, 538 was part of ESPN, then it became part of ABC. Then ABC shut us down in March of this year.
Can you also tell people about the origins of 538 and why it kind of was such a big deal?
Yeah, absolutely. So 538 was started by Lee Silver, who people are probably maybe even more familiar with than 538 itself. But, he has his own origin story. But the main piece is that he had a lot of criticism for how horse race coverage in particular was conducted. That it was a lot of New York Times reporter goes to a random town in Pennsylvania, talks to Susie Bobby in jail, and then writes up an article saying, okay, well, we think that John Kerry is going to win because this is what Susie said, right? I mean, obviously polling was taken into consideration, but it would be sort of a random poll here or there. It's easy to spin individual polls, or individual pollsters might have their own motivations for putting out a poll. And so his argument was we ought to be aggregating the polls because that's how you get closest to to the accurate sentiment of the public. And also he started forecasting. So incorporating, the challenges of the fact that we have an electoral college system, that the results across different states are correlated, that economic sentiment or economic performance also matters in addition to polling, and trying to be a lot more rigorous about the horse race coverage in America, right? No one would ever argue at 538 that horse race coverage should be the only way that we cover politics, but to the extent that we do cover the horse race, it should be in a rigorous manner. And so he started off on his own, then joined the New York Times, then joined the Walt Disney Company. That was a whole saga. The saga ended a few months ago, and I hosted our politics podcast there alongside Nate and others. And as we all scattered to the wind, I started the GD Politics podcast, which found a home on Substack. Like many other folks, it's been a great space to join, in a community in particular to join. And I follow a lot of the same ethos that we did at 538. The way that I describe it is trying to understand the world and politics with curiosity, rigor, and a sense of humor. So we start with questions, not answers. When we answer those questions, we want to be rigorous and empirical about it to the extent that we can, whether it's data, polling, research, whatever. And also, what are we doing here if we're not having fun? So, it's been, and obviously, GD Politics is both my initials. My name is Galen Druk, but I think maybe encapsulates how people feel about politics right now, which is goddamn politics. It's a hard time to find the joy and humor in politics.
Right. So you had a really interesting New York Times piece recently, and we're going to get to that. But first, I want to ask some generic questions about polling. So the first thing that people think of when they think about polling is, I've never been polled.
Oh, okay.
It's like, pollsters never called me, to my knowledge. I've never answered a poll. Why should I even believe polls reflect anything accurate? That's kind of the first part of the question. The second part is, has the accuracy of polling changed over the years? Because 30 years ago, you're calling landlines and everyone has a landline. Now, very few people have a landline. How do you get to people? Is it cell phones? Is it pop-ups on an internet? So, two-part question: why? How can a poll even be accurate to begin with? This is obviously very basic stuff for you, but some people may not know. And then, how's it changed over the years?
This is so important because, right, if we're going to rely on this stuff to understand the world around us, because I would argue that as faulty as polling can be, or as imperfect as polling can be, it's our best way to understand the world around us, because the alternative is just relying on our own personal experiences. And while those experiences are great and add color to the world around us, it's not rigorous, right? So I kind of describe polling as something like a blood test, right? You take a little bit of your blood to get a sense of what the whole looks like, but you don't need to drain your entire system of blood in order to get a picture of what's going on. And so, we do have everyone or all voters weigh in when we have an actual election, but in a democracy, it's good to get a sense of what people think about policy, what people think about the current administration, what motivates them, or even, for business, all kinds of questions like, do you prefer this or that, or where would you like to live, or, do you think that, taxes are too high, or even random stuff like YouGov always does polling on which side of a banana should you open a banana from, or whatever. So if you have never been polled, it's because pollsters are relying on a sample. So most polls will speak to between 500 and 1,000 people for a nationally representative poll. And obviously there are over 350 million Americans. So you're not going to end up talking to a lot of people. When it comes to the actual methodology, it didn't actually even start with landlines, right? Original pollsters were block walking. They would just sort of start at an intersection and go and talk to the folks in one house and the next and the next. And that's an incredibly reliable way of getting people to answer you. You can use your own personal charisma to get them to stay and talk to you. And on the phone, it's a little bit harder. And through texting and email, it's even harder still. During the golden era of polling, we did rely on landlines. Pretty much everyone has one. There's no call screening. People are answering. And back in the day, we would get 20, 30% of respondents actually answering polls. As landlines have gone away, as screening has become more common, response rates have declined precipitously. Now it's something like 2% of people end up actually taking the poll. And so when people express concern about the polling industry, they're right to do that because it is facing incredible challenges. Luckily for the industry, there's a lot of really smart people who care about doing this right. I think for people who say like, screw the pollsters, they're trying to, drive a particular narrative or spin us or whatever, there are folks out there like that. But there are a lot of people who are truly dedicated to trying to understand the world around us. And so ways that they're iterating is, using text message. So you'll get a text and it'll say, we want to hear your thoughts about X, Y, Z, click this link and then you can take a poll. There's ways of, doing online polling, emailing folks to try to get them to do the poll. You can even mail people, like snail mail, and say, go to this website and we'll call this number or whatever to respond to the poll. And so while we used to have the gold standard of polling, which was live actual people calling both cell phones and landlines to get responses, that is no longer sort of going to reliably get you closer to the answer. It's really just using an all of the above approach to reach people where they are. Texting, email, snail mail, calling cell phones, calling landlines, and the likes. And look, in an environment where 1% to 2% of people are responding to polls, even when the pollsters, quote unquote, get it wrong, they still get incredibly close, right? Like, it's a disaster when the polls are 4 percentage points off. Now, that's huge when we have elections that are decided by, 1.5, 2 points. But if your question is, do Americans think that abortion should be legal or illegal in most cases? Do you think America should bomb Iran? Whatever. Being off by 4 percentage points is not as big of an issue because a lot of these are areas where 2/3 of the country agree.
Right. Do you think that politicians rely too much or too little on polling to tack to the center or away from the center on certain positions to decide what their messaging should be?
That's a really, really good question. And in fact, that's a question that I oftentimes ask politicians when I get a chance to sit down with them, which is, what is leadership? Is leadership understanding what the public wants based on the information we have about it and delivering for the public? Or is it having a sense of what's right and bringing the public along for the ride?
Right.
And I think that it depends on what area we're talking about. There are a lot of issues in American life where Americans know what they want. And politicians, no matter how charismatic or, whatever they might be, they're not really going to be able to change public opinion. I mean, there are lots of different examples of this. Abortion is one example where, even though Donald Trump has pivoted away to some extent from pro-life activists, he hasn't actually changed public opinion on the right. In general, folks are still opposed to legal abortion in most circumstances. Another example would be immigration for all the Marco Rubios and Jeb Bushes in 2016 who tried to pivot towards comprehensive immigration reform. That was an issue that Republican voters cared a lot about and weren't going to be swayed by elites in the party. There are other issues where Americans don't think deeply about them, and those issues are liable to change practically overnight. So the Washington Post did a poll about whether or not the United States should bomb Iran during the Israel-Iran conflict. And then again, a poll after we chose to bomb Iran. And support for bombing Iran increased by 30 percentage points amongst Republicans. Your average American is not thinking on a regular basis about whether we should bomb a nuclear facility in Iran. It's just foreign, it's quite literally distant. And so we're relying more on elites to tell us what we should do, to make the case. Whether it's just because we have faith in a particular person to do what's right, and so we adopt their position, or because it gets fought out in the public square and we inform our positions based on the information that we hear. And so I think sometimes cynical politicians just follow the polls. And to the extent that following the polls means delivering on behalf of Americans in the manner that they want, I don't think we should criticize that. They're flip-flopping, they're too malleable, whatever. Part of democracy, part of a representative democracy is that you are supposed to deliver based on what they want. But you can get too carried away with that and lose your own sense of leadership and agency as a leader, because there are a lot of areas where if you believe something and you really make the case for it in public, you can convince people that you're right.
Right. I think foreign policy is a great example because But there's also just a resting assumption that right now Trump and the security state know so much more than I possibly could as a citizen. And so if they make a decision, they're making it on the basis of way more information than I have and way more information than they can talk about publicly. Whereas with something like abortion or immigration, I feel I'm more able, like they kind of know as much as I know. So I think that's one intuition behind it.
And it's a sort of intuitive set of moral values, right?
Yeah.
Like you know what you care about. It's a
Right.
pretty concrete thing.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about your recent New York Times op-ed, which was titled something like "The Democrats Need Their Own Donald Trump." So basically the premise of your article starts out by acknowledging that the Democratic Party is currently in a kind of crisis, but it's a crisis that has been familiar to both parties in the past, and that the crisis also represents an opportunity if it's looked at through the right vantage point. So describe that to me a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that headline is intentionally attention grabbing, of course, and it did rile up some feathers. And I come to this not as a partisan, but more somebody who's spent, more than a decade looking at public opinion data and just seeing how the public responds to politicians, both on the right and the left. And sort of the conversation has turned to how does the Democratic Party see its way out of the wilderness? And a lot of people have a lot of different ideas. And this is one option. And in some ways, it's following the Donald Trump 2016 blueprint. And no, I'm not talking about sort of, posing challenges to democratic norms or whatever. I'm talking about the way he handled the sort of moderate versus conservative divide within the Republican Party. Now, when Obama was inaugurated the second time at the beginning of 2013, Republicans were actually more unpopular then than Democrats are today, but very close. I mean, the Democratic Party is like net negative 24 percentage points in Pew polling, and that's about as unpopular as the party has ever been in the 30 years of Pew doing this research. I mean, it was a little bit worse towards the tail end of Biden's presidency, but it's pretty bad. And so Republicans were in a similar spot back then, and there were folks like Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush who their sort of roadmap for getting out of the wilderness was moderating on immigration, right? Comprehensive immigration reform, more of the compassionate conservatism that you might have seen from George W. Bush and the like. And, so they made their pitch accordingly. And then there were folks like Ted Cruz and Scott Walker who were more, staunch conservatives, right? Ted Cruz was a Tea Partier who was in favor of things like reforms to Social Security and Medicare. And Scott Walker, of course, became famous with Act 10 in Wisconsin, which was limiting the bargaining rights for public unions. And this is like pretty standard conservative fare. And that was kind of what was on offer, the two directions that the Republican Party could have gone in after repeated failures in elections against Barack Obama. And Donald Trump came in and I guess you could say he chose both or he chose neither of those paths, which is that he ran to the right of his party on immigration, proposing, a border wall, mass deportation, and the like. And by the way, back then, those were not policies that were broadly popular, but it was an issue that Republican primary voters cared an awful lot about. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, he ran to the left of his party on things like federal spending on Medicare and Social Security, infrastructure, universal health care, put aside how he necessarily governed in his first term, but that was how he campaigned. And add to that he savaged his own party. Mm-hmm. He trashed the Republican Party for the Iraq War. He trashed all three of the most recent Republican nominees, so Romney, McCain, W. And what that allowed him to do was create a separation for himself from a deeply unpopular party, frustrate people's partisan perceptions, kind of taking a left position on some things and a right position on others, to the point that on election day 2016, voters saw him as a significantly less extreme option than Hillary Clinton, despite the fact that he had...
That's a really important point to underscore, and it's super counterintuitive, which is, so many people see Trump as an extreme candidate. Let's just forget the facts of the matter and talk about perception. he was viewed as a less conservative candidate than the alternatives on election day in 2016.
Well, he was seen as less ideologically extreme than Hillary Clinton. So he was seen as more moderate than Hillary Clinton.
And more moderate than...
And also more moderate, less conservative than every Republican nominee going back to George H.W. Bush, which is as far back as the data goes.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right to say, like, that's kind of counterintuitive. Why would people think that? He did take extreme positions throughout his campaign. But when we talk about moderation in public opinion and in politics in general, I think oftentimes the mind goes to, I don't know, an elderly voter at a diner in New Hampshire who is, you know, lining up the different positions of the Democrats and Republicans and being like, I just kind of want the middle position on everything. And that's not what a moderate looks like in reality. It more frequently looks like somebody who will take the right position on one issue and the left position on the other. Somebody who is idiosyncratic.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that doing that as a politician also leads to you being seen as more moderate, but maybe more importantly, frustrating perceptions of you as a partisan, right? We live in a world where both parties are unpopular. Today, the Democratic Party is less popular than the Republican Party, but Americans broadly don't think particularly highly of either party. And at, I think, 43%, we have a higher percentage of Americans identifying as independent than ever before. So, you know, if you're running in a really red district or a really blue district, you want to be extreme, you want to take the top to bottom left position or the top to bottom right position, whatever, do it. People will still elect you. But if you're running in a competitive election, one of the most savvy things you can do is make sure that voters don't just see you as a Republican or just as a Democrat, but as above the fray.
Mm-hmm. So in your article, you mentioned, I mean, you could have called this the Democrats need another Clinton, because you talk about how Clinton essentially pursued the same strategy. Can you talk about that?
That might have gotten maybe similar hate mail, but probably not as clickable.
Yeah.
I think Democrats' relationship with Clinton has become complicated, or maybe it's always been complicated, but it's hard to deny the way that he reoriented politics. So, and, you know, I was only 1 or 2 years old, so I'm not going to pretend like I remember, but a lot of people probably don't remember what the political world looked like in 1992. George H.W. Bush had secured a third consecutive term in the White House for Republicans, which is very rare. And the first part of his presidency had been so successful that many ambitious Democrats decided not to run in the Democratic primary because they thought it was so assured that he would get another term in the White House.
And also, this is coming off of Ronald Reagan's absolute shellacking of Democrats, not just wins, but gigantic wins.
Absolutely, right? And a sort of successful Gulf War for George H.W. Bush. I mean, I think he might have landed the highest approval rating of any president in American history during the sort of modern polling era. I think his approval rating was like 92%. After the Gulf War, maybe only rivaled by his son in the days after September 11th. So the Bushes are two presidents who have experienced some of the highest highs and the lowest lows when it comes to presidential public opinion. But, you know, folks like Mario Cuomo, who everyone knew wanted to be president, didn't even run in the primary because he thought HW was so assured to win a second term. And so this not particularly well-known governor of Arkansas gets in the race, and he runs as a bit of an outsider, and he also runs against his party. So he runs to, everyone knows this part, he runs to the right on crime and deficit spending. He goes on to obviously pass welfare reform and the crime bill, but he runs to the left on healthcare. He ran on a universal healthcare platform that was far more progressive than the Affordable Care Act ever ended up being. Obviously, the fact that we ended up ultimately in a recession helped his general election campaign, but he created this break with the way that Democrats had been perceived. And his successful political gambit, in some ways, reoriented electoral politics in America such that Democrats went from losing the White House to winning the popular vote in 7 of the 8 next elections. And so he was somebody else who could both run to the right on some issues, run to the left on others, and also importantly, run against his own party and create enough of a separation for voters who would previously not consider voting for a Democrat to then vote for a Democrat.
Right. So this is very interesting. I mean, there's a pattern then of being willing to look at what, to take the issue that your party is most popular about, which for Democrats, for Republicans, it was like immigration during the Trump years. For Democrats, perhaps it's healthcare, and doubling and tripling down on that quote unquote extreme view, with the assumption that actually the voters are more extreme on this than the establishment is. So you can afford to go 100 miles per hour in that direction on that issue, and then tacking towards the opposite direction on an issue where actually voters are a lot more moderate than your party is willing to allow, right? That's essentially the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, some people would describe this as like a primary strategy versus a general election strategy. But I think that in order to seem authentic, you kind of have to do both at the same time. Now, Donald Trump's immigration policies were not out and out popular in 2015, 2016, when he introduced them to the public. But they were very popular, and they were, kind of most importantly, very salient to Republican primary voters. And in particular, a certain subset of primary voters that won him that primary, right? He started off winning primaries by with 35% of the vote, and because it was such a fractured field, that allowed him to end up winning that 2016 primary. But the other thing is, immigration just wasn't all that important to the broader electorate. So he could really attract the people that he needed to win the primary using immigration as an issue. But it wasn't necessarily, I think that a lot of people in the media and Democratic politics thought he was going to do a lot to repel the rest of the public with the way he talked about immigration. And he certainly repelled some people with the way he talked about immigration. But the way that he appealed to a broader coalition was on more economic issues. Like, I'm going to be the first Republican in generations who says, we're not touching Social Security, we're not touching Medicare, we're spending more public money to make your life better. And so, and also, obviously, there's a whole piece of this that gets at like personality and media strategy and communication style, which we can talk about, and obviously that helped Trump in particular ways. But it was, okay, what are the strengths of my party, which I for him as well was the economy. Like, Republicans in general have been trusted more on the economy. So also doubling down on that when moving to the left of it. So for Democrats, what could that look like today? Democrats are trusted a lot more than Republicans on the issue of healthcare. And they have been for a long time, even during Biden's unpopular presidency, where Democrats lost the advantage on education. They had gained an advantage on immigration by the end of Trump's first term because he had sort of pursued more extreme policies that created its own backlash. So while Democrats were losing the public on all kinds of issues, they maintained it on healthcare. They're only stronger on healthcare now, post the bill formerly known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And it's increasing in salience. You see more and more Americans saying that healthcare is important to them.
Yeah, and I think you can also see this by the reaction of progressives and Democrats to the United Healthcare shooter, Luigi Mangione, where it was just like surprisingly easy to find people in my life that just totally were like, yeah, I mean, I kind of like the guy. The guy had a point, and he murdered somebody, right? So I think that tells you something about the ambient level of concern and outrage at the healthcare system on the left.
Yeah, and I think you could get a lot of Democrats excited about, I don't know, I'm not a policy wonk, but maybe the policy is something like a public option, right? I think Kamala Harris said in 2019 when she was running that we should abolish private insurance. Obviously, European countries don't even abolish private insurance. So I don't know that going all the way in that direction would help the Democratic Party, but proposing something like a public option, or even more populist positions like, we as Americans, we're not going to spend a penny more on prescription drugs than those Europeans do. And it's unfair that they would expect us to do otherwise, or whatever it may be, right? I think could really get the Democrats that you need in a primary excited, while Republicans aren't going to be like, oh my God, they want, better healthcare coverage or whatever. Like, it's not going to freak Republicans out. Now, if I think Democrats decided to make we're going to go super far left on gender and sexuality, I think that that would cause a backlash.
That would be the opposite, because I mean, the strategy requires you to pivot to the center on some kind of 80-20 issue where your party is actually not popular. And for Democrats, it seems to me that would be anything related to wokeness, anything related to, gender reassignment surgeries, hormone replacement, puberty blockers, all of the category of woke, racial preferences, all that stuff is consistently less popular with the masses than with the liberal elites. So would part of the strategy include a hard tack against all of those things?
Yeah, so I think, right, if you're going to run to the left on some issues and to the right on others, what do you run to the right on? So say you go left on healthcare. I would also argue you could go left on housing or, more affordability type issues. So what are you going to the right on? In the piece, I suggest, immigration as one of them, or even the debt and deficit as an option. That might not sound coherent to top to bottom partisans, but again, the marginal voters who are deciding the election don't see the world in that kind of red and blue way. So, I think one of the reasons I would say that, and again, Donald Trump is probably going to create his own backlash to his immigration policies during his second term, because we experienced something in America known as thermostatic public opinion, where you kind of overinterpret your mandate as a newly elected president, go too far in one direction, and then the voters say, okay, well, screw this. Actually, I don't want that extreme either. Even if I didn't like what Joe Biden was doing, I also don't want sort of, workplace raids or whatever it may be. But I think at least on the border, American opinion is not going to change that much. Americans want a secure border. They're happy with what Donald Trump has done on the border, and they were very unhappy with what Joe Biden did on the border. So I think probably pivoting on that, or even just openly attacking how the Biden administration handled the migrant crisis would sort of create some of that space, even if you then go and show compassion towards, folks who are in the country illegally today. If they're contributing to, society more broadly. On the issue of woke stuff. So one reason I went to immigration is because when you look at the most important issues to Americans, immigration ranks really highly. Whereas things like, maybe it just shows up in different areas, but woke, social justice, race relations, things like that, just don't rank as highly as things like, it's always number one is the economy. Oftentimes number two is poor government leadership, but then number three will be immigration, and then it varies according to what, the news cycle and whatnot. So I think, yes, you can signal to people by one, I think everyone has already tacitly acknowledged that the Democratic Party's positions in 2019, 2020 were unpopular, whether it's decriminalizing crossing the border or defunding the police or abolishing ICE or whatever. The part of the Democratic Party that says they're working on behalf of the working class, I think ended up realizing that they weren't reflecting the values of the working class. And you have seen people like AOC on her Fighting the Oligarchy tour not talk about this stuff. You saw even when AOC was congratulating Zohran Mamdani in winning the Democratic primary in the New York City mayoral race, I think she said on Twitter congratulating him, I want to congratulate Zohran Mamdani, we're going to make New York safe, blah, 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 and affordable, right? The first word she used to describe the New York she imagined with Zohran Mamdani was safe. And that's because she knows that the left part of the Democratic Party, in particular, and the Democratic Party as a whole, lost the American public on crime and safety. And so I think you're not even just seeing that from the moderates or whatever, you're seeing that from the straight up left in the Democratic Party. That's already been accomplished in some ways. I think that voters don't care all that much about trans issues. They just don't rank very highly in terms of salience when you ask people. We do know that when you ask Americans, do you think that trans girls should be able to participate in women's sports and the like? Yes, a clear majority of Americans say no, and a clear majority of Americans say that minors shouldn't have access to these surgeries. I don't think today that's going to continue being a major driver of conflict in politics, because I don't think there's anybody really arguing particularly enthusiastically for the 20 side of that now 80-20 issue.
Interesting. It strikes me, so the counter argument I would make is that though you don't necessarily see people at the national level arguing for the 20 side of those unpopular issues, like the parents of two in some town in Westchester where like this stuff is like all in their children's schools, it still matters to them. Like they may want to vote for a Democrat, but they may be more likely to vote for that Democrat if they're not just like quiet about these issues, but are actively like, no, we're going back to common sense on sports. We're going back to common sense on wait till you're 18 to get the elective surgeries you want. And they want someone to be able to say that in a debate because though it's like maybe not quite as salient, it is quite important to the voters who it's important to, I guess.
It's also signaling, right? There's another thing which is like, even if it's not my most important issue, I just want to see that you're not a top to bottom partisan or that you're not extreme or whatever. And I think we saw Gavin Newsom do that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think ambitious Democrats are already doing some of that stuff. Like Gavin Newsom did that on trans women and women's sports.
Mm-hmm.
Pete Buttigieg said in an interview that we should have opened schools sooner during the pandemic. So I think there are already Democrats who are critiquing the Democratic Party's, policies of 2019, 2020. If you want to go big, right? Like in the same way that Bill Clinton went big with crime and debt and deficit, and pick an issue that is high salience, is going to be one of the axes of conflict. I might even recommend the debt because like Americans don't even need to totally understand the minutia of interest rates and the like, or the minutia of public debt, but it's intuitive of like, I spend way more money than I have. Eventually things are going to catch up to me.
Right.
And that issue has been dropped from American political conflict for like 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a place where you can highlight sort of the political establishment's, either side of the political establishment's hypocrisy, right?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Republicans talk all about how they care about the debt and deficit, but they just increased the deficit over the next 10 years by $4 trillion.
Yeah.
And then likewise, Democrats will talk until they're blue in the face about the importance of, funding things like healthcare and education for young people. But the way that we've set up our public expenditures today, we're transferring wealth from the youth to the old, right? Like spending so much money on old people today is going to ensure that we can't spend money on health and education for young people tomorrow. That's maybe like a different way than people are used to hearing that issue, but it's been, although America has not solved this issue, it has been used to great political effect at certain points in our past, like the 1992 election and Ross Perot. And while Ross Perot didn't win, and the debt and deficit were not taken care of overnight, I think that put enough political pressure on Bill Clinton to end up balancing the budget during his presidency and actually be the last person to pay down the debt. And so, oftentimes talking about new topics in ways that Americans don't often hear them discussed and stealing some of your opponent's strengths is a good way to shake things up, get people to listen to you.
So if they went down the debt route, what would they be able to say? Because like you either cut or you raise taxes. So what should they say when that question is presented? What are you cutting, or are you just raising taxes?
Yeah, so I'm not a Democratic strategist, so this is a bit more like an academic exercise for me, and it's kind of based on looking at the public opinion data. But Americans, and this is one of the things about the Trump administration, right? They're very actually sort of, good at naming the problem. And naming the problem in a sort of like more candid, audacious way than most people in politics will. So for example, like health, right? Like the Maha report. I'm actually doing a podcast that's coming out soon on this, which is like the way that they go at ultra processed foods, sugar, lack of exercise, screen time, all this stuff. I talked to the dean of the School of Public Health at the University of Washington at St. Louis, and he's like, yeah, we haven't seen an administration name the problem like this audaciously in a quarter century.
Yeah.
But then the sort of like follow through is a little like, okay, are any policies going to actually get implemented? Like, because you're also rescinding funding for research on how chemicals affect children's health and like that kind of stuff. So when you're talking about the debt and deficit, I mean, Donald Trump is absolutely right. We are not efficient in how we're spending Americans' hard-earned dollars. And the American government is bloated, and we ought to make it work a lot better for Americans. And so, yeah, there's cutting to do. At the same time, it's not fair that Jeff Bezos pays less in taxes as a percentage than the firefighter on Staten Island. So one of the ways that we solve the debt and deficit is by, being more efficient, but actually doing it the right way, not just doing it in like a sort of random half-assed way, because ultimately Doge didn't save very much money and created inefficiencies in the process. And at the same time, scratch the itch of people feeling like there's a mismatch or there's an unfairness in American society today between the rich and the poor.
Okay, so let's look at how some of the top Democrat contenders might possibly or not possibly be able to execute on this strategy. So Gavin Newsom is one you already mentioned. Currently, betting markets have him at the top spot for whatever that's worth. I mean, it's so far out, it's not worth much, but betting markets have him in the top spot for the 2028 Democratic nominee. A few months ago, he went on a podcast with Charlie Kirk and I think Steve Bannon as well, and was basically having friendly conversations with people that weren't just Liz Cheney Republicans, but really further to the right. So do you think that he could possibly execute this strategy successfully? And do you think his strategy of having friendly conversations with right-wingers is going to help him or backfire?
I think it already has backfired. And I think he's already pivoted away from that to some extent. No, Donald Trump, even though he trashed his own party, he wasn't nice to Democrats. He wasn't like, let me sit down with like Neera Tanden and do a podcast together or whatever, right? He was trashing both parties. So you can acknowledge that your own party fucked up, which I think you're hearing a lot of Democrats do, without being like, and the other party, like the Republican Party, is great on this. And so, I think while we all like the idea of or many of us like the idea of bipartisanship, or if not bipartisanship, mutual understanding, being able to have conversations across ideological differences and the like, I do wonder if a Democratic primary electorate is going to be like, I don't really like that. Also, the other thing is, does it seem authentic? If your whole brand is being the type of person who will talk to anyone, meet people where they are, almost be like the Pope, go and like wash people's feet and hear from anyone and just take it all in and be that kind of almost like saintly figure who's willing to commune with every type of person in America, if that's your brand, then great, do it. I don't think that that's Gavin Newsom's brand. His brand has been like a kind of a fighter for the Democratic Party. And I think he's probably getting back into that space with all of the, protests and National Guard and Marines in California. I think he understands that the Democratic Party lost the public opinion battle on many of these issues and so has pivoted away and whatnot. And that's a different endeavor than being like, hey, look, I can talk to Charlie Kirk. And like, whatever, those conversations were interesting. If he wants to do that, at the end of the day, I don't think voters care that much about it. Like, will he win or lose the Democratic nomination based on a podcast he did with Charlie Kirk? No. But I don't know that the sort of triangulation necessarily means being like nice to the other side. In a way, it means like trashing the whole establishment.
Right. What about AOC? You and Nate Silver the other day said that AOC, or maybe this was a few months ago, said that AOC might be, probably would be the nominee in 2028. Would she be able to execute on this strategy you're recommending? Or is she too wedded to basically democratic socialism to pivot on any of these issues?
So I want to be very specific about what Nate and I did. We did a Democratic primary draft for 2028, and the motivating question was, who do we think is the likeliest to win the nomination? And so while we thought she might be the likeliest, it doesn't mean she's probably going to win the nomination. It just means there's not even like a 51% chance that she would win the nomination. Just the second person we chose was like Josh Shapiro. So like she's slightly more likely than Josh Shapiro, but you would probably take the field over AOC if you were actually lining them up. And part of my rationale for choosing AOC in this draft, I chose her first, and then Nate was like, screw you, I was gonna pick her. Anyway, it got way more attention than it should have for some silly game. It was on like MSNBC and Fox News the whole following weekend. But part of my rationale was I expect a lot of people are gonna run for president in 2028. The Democratic side, maybe on the Republican side too. And when you have a very divided primary field, there is a strong advantage to having almost a celebrity about you, or a certain charisma that attracts a group of devoted part of the electorate. That's what Donald Trump did, right? I mentioned that he was winning 35% of the vote in those early primaries. And so you don't need a majority. You just need the most of anybody. And the left part of the progressive part of the Democratic Party may be enthusiastic enough about her to be like, screw everyone else, we're with her no matter what. And that can sort of power her through a certain part of the primary calendar. I think the other thing is, like, Democrats have spent the past decade nominating candidates who are like bad at politics. And at that, also very establishment-y characters. For being a party that has historically nominated the more anti-establishment characters like Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter. Those were the three previous successful Democratic nominees to Joe Biden. And there's a whole generation of young people who have never seen a charismatic person who's good at politics lead the Democratic Party.
It's interesting you frame it that way, because if you think about it, post-Obama, Democrats have run 3 people. 2 of those were in some way not legitimate primaries because, well, what the DNC did to Bernie Sanders in the first case, and then the fact that Kamala wasn't even primaried and almost certainly would not have won if she were. The only one of the 3 that was a totally untampered with, unmanipulated primary, they won.
Well, okay, it's interesting that you frame it that way, because like I would say Hillary Clinton would have won the 2016 primary with or without the DNC. Like it felt very close, but it wasn't that close ultimately. If you remember Joe Biden in 2020, like it took all the cavalry coming out post South Carolina to rally around him to win, because up until that point he done shit in like Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. It looked like for a second Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee. And so it was the sort of party elite, calling out the cavalry to challenge Bernie Sanders and get behind Joe Biden. I think part of what has happened is that, politics is about critiquing the other side and trying to sort of gain ground that they've ceded or whatever. But you can do that to a fault. Donald Trump is like the most anti-establishment character we've had in at least my lifetime and probably anyone's lifetime in modern history in American politics, or who actually ended up winning. And historically, Democrats have been more of the anti-establishment party, or at least, critiquing things like institutions in American life, like church, family, military, like all of those kinds of things. Party politics, whatever, whether it's go back to Howard Dean or, whatever. It's the younger group. It's more coalitional, mixed up different, parts of American life, less ideological, whatever. Then Donald Trump becomes the leader of the Republican Party, and Democrats reflexively just take the position diametrically opposed to Donald Trump. And it was like that. It was like, oh, you want to build a wall, we want to decriminalize crossing the border. You want to call in the National Guard, we want to abolish the police, or whatever it might have been. And obviously, when you behave that way, you become entrapped to the politician that you're responding to, because when they take a popular position, then you're forcing yourself to take the unpopular position. More broadly, what happened was Trump is so anti-establishment that Democrats sort of found themselves in a way becoming the cheerleaders for the establishment.
Right.
Because that was the anti-Trump position. And so this party that had been consistently nominating successful anti-establishment or less pro-establishment characters was nominating people like Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, who are so establishmenty. And think of like other past establishment characters that Democrats have nominated that didn't do, like John Kerry. Right? The Democrats have seemed to do well when they get this kind of young gun who takes on the status quo to do their bidding.
Right. Another contender then, I don't know if this fits that bill exactly, but Pete Buttigieg.
I'm just realizing I never answered your question about AOC. Like, could she?
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea, you know?
Yeah.
So it would seem inauthentic to suddenly be like...
I don't think that... my answer is no, because I don't believe she can tack to the center on immigration, debt, or wokeness. I think that her brand is too synonymous with progressive politics and socialist politics that she would not seem authentic tacking to the center on any of those issues she would need to tack to the center on.
What you've seen her try to do is not talk about some of that stuff and reorient the conflict in American politics from red versus blue to sort of like the working class versus the billionaires. She was very Obama-esque on her Fighting Oligarchy tour, where she was like, you know, they try to divide us based on Republicans and Democrats, but they're just using that to distract us kind of from a more class-based conflict. So she'll try to just reorient the conflict altogether so that she doesn't.
Sanders.
Yeah, so that she doesn't have to talk about maybe all of that other stuff.
Could work.
I mean, maybe, and you know, saying that we thought AOC was the likeliest to win the nomination was not saying that we thought she was the likeliest to win the general election or the best position to win the general election. But to your point about what she's become synonymous with, like, Democrats look back at the past 10 years of American electoral politics or presidential politics probably not particularly fondly. And so in some ways, the Obama or Clinton or Jimmy Carter type mold is somebody who's a clean slate, somebody who doesn't really have any record of what they thought about ICE or the police or gender or whatever in 2019. Now, in a world where electoral politics are oftentimes very motivated by like who can get attention, could some of these lesser known people like Wes Moore or Josh Shapiro or Ruben Gallego or take your pick be able to marshal attention? Or will everyone just become like, oh my God, AOC's running for president, we're just going to cover her nonstop? Because that's the ticket to a Donald Trump style takeover of everyone's political attention.
Right.
Could they marshal enough attention? I don't know, but they are the more kind of tabula rasa types who have done it for Democrats in the past.
So Pete Buttigieg is another name. He's someone I've always liked because he just seems to have a pretty rational, intelligent response to any question he's asked. He's Obama-esque in that way. And I'm attracted to those kinds of candidates naturally. Just if I feel like you exude intelligence and intellectual maturity, that to me, regardless of your politics, puts you higher on my list than someone who engages in pure demagoguery. My problem with Pete Buttigieg, and the reason I don't think he can win, is because I honestly am not sure that conservative black voters in South Carolina are okay, even in the year 2025, pulling the lever for a gay man. And I'm not going to say that I have a lot of polling data to support that, but what I do know is that, and this is something I think Democrats do not want to talk about. I think it's very uncomfortable to acknowledge just how socially conservative black voters within the Democratic Party are relative to white voters, because the basic picture you have is black people on the whole are as socially conservative as white people, pretty much. I mean, there's not a huge difference in terms of gay marriage, trans issues, all this stuff, except all the black conservatives, most of them still vote Democrat. That's the difference.
Oh, there's decreasingly so.
Decreasingly so, but still to a great extent. And so if you're running in a Democratic primary in South Carolina, like you still have to get that vote. And a lot of that vote is a lot less comfortable with a gay candidate than the rest of the Democratic Party. And it's really underappreciated and not talked about. And because of that, I looked up how Pete Buttigieg did when he ran for president in 2020, crushed it in Iowa, 25%.
And he won. I mean, that got so muddled that no one ever really
he won?
figured out.
Oh, I thought he was one. Oh, I see. Okay.
But
he was within
the
1
end-
percentage point.
In the
of
end,
Bernie.
I'm pretty sure he won, even though it was such a botched administration of the Iowa caucuses by the Democratic Party that I think there might still be a question mark.
Yeah, and then he gets like 24% in New Hampshire, which is he's within spitting distance again of a win there, and then he drops down to 8% in South Carolina. And so I'm not saying I know for a fact him being gay is the reason, but I do know when I picture and just think of all the people I know that fit that bill of a black voter over 50 who lives in South Carolina or Virginia or something. A lot of them still do have problems with pulling the lever for a gay man for president.
Yeah, I mean, what you say is really important, right? Is that when you have sort of a group of voters who, the way that this is described is sort of connected fate or whatever, have this feeling of, for black people, it's we're going to vote for the Democratic Party because we feel like, what happens to other black people affects all of us as black people. And we know that the Democratic Party is more watching out for people like us.
Mm-hmm.
Then you end up with much more viewpoint diversity within that group, within that party.
Right.
Whereas white people separate themselves out along liberal and conservative lines between the two parties. And we have seen over the past, in the Trump era, some of that breakdown, like particularly amongst Latino voters, because the same thing was happening. In the Obama era, conservative Latinos were voting for Obama. But Donald Trump was able to, it becomes a sort of waterfall effect or snowball effect.
Mm-hmm.
Once more people in your milieu, in your community start voting another way, you say, oh, okay, like this is a socially acceptable thing to do.
Right.
Maybe I'll do that too. And Donald Trump ended up outright winning Latino men in 2024 after overall Latinos shifted 7 points to the right between 16 and 20, and then 9 points again to the right between 20 and 24. So one of the effects that has is it makes the Democratic Party more out and out liberal, right? There's less of that viewpoint diversity within the Democratic Party itself because now not only have white people divided along conservative and liberal lines, now Latino and black people have increasingly done the same. That means that maybe it's easier to win a Democratic primary being a total liberal, being somebody who appeals to the MSNBC set, as opposed to somebody who appeals to a broader coalition. And I think you've heard some people saying like, this is interesting. Zoran Mamdani won the New York Democratic mayoral primary without the majority of black voters. And the sort of conventional wisdom is that in a Democratic primary, black voters choose the winners. That obviously wasn't the case in this election. So I don't know if in 2028, somebody can win the Democratic primary without the support of a majority of black voters within the Democratic Party. It may be the case that they can't. There's another challenge too, which gets beyond sexuality, which is like Bernie Sanders had an awfully difficult time winning over voters of color when he first came onto the scene. Like in 2016, he was winning like all white people. He sort of became a better known figure, kept making his case, and in 2020, he did significantly better with Latino voters, whereas Latino voters were like 100% for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Oftentimes it's just like whoever has a better relationship with the establishment, and there's, whatever, particularly, and one of the tests for that is Nevada, obviously, when we're thinking about how Latino voters considered Bernie Sanders, a lot of those caucuses are sort of motivated by, party politics, right? It's like, who's getting you to come to the caucus meeting, whatever. And so maybe like with time, you can make your case and he spend more time being introduced to the different parts of the Democratic Party that you might want to appeal to outside of whoever just like sees you on MSNBC or whatever. But that is a challenge. As far as the polling is concerned, overwhelmingly Americans say that they would be willing to elect a gay president. Now, is that true? I don't know. But I think if Pete Buttigieg is running, but I think if Pete Buttigieg does not win the Democratic primary in 2028, I think we should be open-minded to the idea that it's not just based on sexuality. Also, his kind of very like intellectualizing technocratic response to everything has a certain high appeal to some people,
right,
but may feel alienating to others.
Right.
So there's a lot going on in terms of what you can end up with. Right. Nobody thought in 2018 that everyone was gonna, nobody thought in 2008 that everyone was gonna go for the black guy named Barack Hussein Obama, but with your own personal charisma and building on successes, you can convince people. Remember this, when he won the Iowa caucuses in 2008, black voters in South Carolina were not supporting him. They were supporting Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Because of those establishment relationships and Bill Clinton's history with the Democratic Party and blah, 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 blah. But once Barack Obama proved, this is how the story goes, proved that he could be successful, that he wasn't just like this bright young guy with new ideas, that he could be electorally viable, he got a whole lot more people to sort of board that train. And so sometimes success begets more success and people forget about the things about you that they might have, not initially saw as appealing.
Right. Okay, final question. If you were hired as a consultant for the Democratic Party based on all of your polling and political science knowledge, and you had to sort of boil down your recommendation to a soundbite, what would it be? How to win in 2028?
Oh boy, that is like a really hard question, but I would say something like politics is distasteful and exhausting. The Democratic Party itself has contributed a lot to that. The Republican Party has certainly done its fair share too. We need to acknowledge where both parties have fucked up and move on in a way that just serves everybody.
And plug your podcast one more time for people that want to hear more from you and your Substack.
Yes, absolutely. It is gdpolitics.com is where you can find the Substack. Either, stands for Galen Drew Politics or Goddamn Politics, however way you feel. And you can find GD Politics wherever you get podcasts.
All right, Galen Drew, thanks so much.
Thank you.
What is the connection between the rise and success of Donald Trump over the last decade and the parallel decline and weakness of the Democratic Party? Now, when I ask people that question, I generally get one of three reactions. If I ask somebody who has Trump derangement syndrome that question, they say, well, Trump is a total failure, so it's a silly question. There's no need to think about the connection between Donald Trump's success and the decline of the Democratic brand because Trump's a failure. If I ask people who have MAGA plasma racing through their bloodstream, they say, well, Trump is brilliant, and so 80% of this is his doing, 20% is the stupidity and destructive nature of the people on the left and their tendencies to destroy themselves. Now, if I ask people of an analytical bent, I think they give me the correct answer, which is there is a very big connection between the two, but it is difficult to quantify it. It's very, though, important to understand. There's no doubt that Donald Trump has had failures over the last 10 years. Of course, he lost the 2020 election.
Okay, if there's one AI site builder you need to meet, it's this dope tech from Wix. Now, this whole flow is a conversation, so your words actually build your website. I'm going for a story, and after a free-flowing conversation, I get this detailed site brief. And just like that, my first draft is ready. Now, that's dope. Next, you can really get in there and style it your way. Here's the fun part. You can regenerate this whole thing over and over, or you can tweak something specific, like your layout. Let me describe what I had in mind. Yeah, that's fire. If there was ever a time to speak life into your dreams, it's right now using the Wix AI website builder.
Constant reminders of your moderate to severe Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis can make it hard to be there when it matters most. If your symptoms aren't under control, it may be time to talk to your doctor about #1 prescribed Entyvio. Entyvio has helped many people achieve long-term relief and remission. Doctors have been prescribing Entyvio for more than 10 years. Entyvio offers 2 maintenance options, including the Entyvio pen. Infusion and serious allergic reactions can happen during or after treatment. Entyvio may increase risk of infection, which can be serious. PML, a rare, potentially fatal brain infection, cannot be ruled out. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, sores, or are prone to infections. Liver problems can occur. Ask your healthcare provider about Entyvio. Relief, remission, for real.
But there's also no doubt that he's won twice, and that right now he's dominating our politics, and that Democrats are in trouble. Trump's poll numbers aren't great, but they're better than the Democrats. And I ask Democrats all the time, the worse you think Trump is, the stupider you think he is, the more ineffective, the more out of step with public opinion, the more you must think your own party is a catastrophe, because you're losing to this guy. He's got better poll numbers than the Democrats do. Now, I think this is a topic that's worthy of a book, or at least a 5,000-word essay someplace like the Atlantic magazine or wherever. Don't have time for this now, but I will lay out what I think would be a pretty good book. This storyline, this dynamic is, to me, the framework for what is the best explanation for what's happened in our politics in the last decade, maybe more. And I think it's also the biggest clue to what's going to happen next. Beyond winning 2 of the last 3 presidential elections, Trump has accomplished a lot. There's stuff that he's accomplished that you may not think are great, but they're things he set out to do. He just got the trade deal with Europe, trade deal with Japan. He's presided over an economy where the NASDAQ and the S&P are way up. Inflation is not fully tamed, but it's lower than it was under the previous president. Passed the tax cut bill. Lots of investment coming in from the private sector, both American companies and overseas. Again, achieved goals that conservatives have wanted for a long time. Gotten rid of DEI, not just from the public sector, but forced a lot of private companies to get rid of it. Scaling down lots of government departments, including the Department of Education. Changed the way, the ability of trans athletes to participate in women's sports. Gotten the Ivy League colleges, many of them, to change their policies. Successfully bombed Iran's nuclear facilities, and many other things. And I'll add to the list NATO, getting NATO countries to pony up more money. Now, again, some of these things are only positive in the eyes of Trump backers, but I think there are 4 things at least that are objectively in the interest of the United States. One would be immigration, controlling the border. Trump has clearly in this area, and all 4 of the areas I'm going to list, he's clearly done some things that people rightly say are overstep, that these policies have some downsides. But controlling the border is something that's in the national interest, something a majority of the Americans want. Trump has created a spectacle, but he's also shifted the paradigm on what it takes to close the border and how effective it can be. Number 2, tariffs, okay? Trump has changed the paradigm there too. Lots of these countries now are doing what the United States wants. The coverage this week of the deal with the EU, favorable to the United States, favorable to Trump. Even news organizations that don't normally say positive things about Trump have said this is in the United States' interest. Trump got a good deal out of this. And again, the goal is clear. He wants to re-engineer global trade by leveraging the U.S. market and other American advantages without hurting the American or global economy. Right now, that appears on track. It's early. These deals are not fleshed out yet. But I'll say again, this is another area of Trump achievement in the national interest. Other presidents didn't do it, just like closing the border. And Democrats just pretend it's just a total failure. Same with number 3, controlling the size of the workforce. Trump has turbocharged the capacity of the White House to control the size of the bureaucracy. He already has eliminated a lot of positions. He plans to eliminate more. This concept that we've had for decades that the federal government's just going to keep growing. He's figured out a way to change that. Again, popular, not in every respect, overreach in some areas, but this is another area that Democrats are simply criticizing. Finally, as I mentioned before, NATO, where Trump has ensured that terms and conditions apply now to be a member. He's changed the relationship from one where the European countries were free riding and freeloading to one now that's more transactional. It's a post-globalist arrangement in which the alliance can live on, but on terms that are far more favorable to the United States. Now, again, I say again, in each case, there are objectively downsides to what Trump has done. But I'll say also in each case that overall, these directionally are positive and popular. And no other recent president has had the requisite desire or drive to change the status quo in such a fundamental way. In this country, the Democrats simply accentuate the downsides of these achievements. They find and highlight the weak links, and there are weak links, rather than grappling with what's actually happening that I think is more important, that the trends in this country in terms of public opinion have fueled Trump's rise in capacity to get stuff done. Trump has understood where public opinion was on these issues and others, and the Democratic Party has been and largely remains clueless. Okay? This is to me fundamental if you're thinking about the connection between what Trump has done and what's happened with the Democratic Party. And it's not just the United States. Trump has read the mood of where things are and these issues and others, and the Democrats have failed. The American left has failed on these and other issues. So if you look at Europe and the other industrialized democracies in the West, you see the same conditions that have grown over decades that have caused a rebellion against the parties on the left. Out of control mass migration, out of control crime, the dominant influence of wokeness in all sorts of cultural institutions, the LGBTQ changes that many have seen as overreach, particularly in the area of trans, censorship, overregulation, cancellation, neo-socialism, all these things exist in other countries. Kim Strassel has written about what's happened in the United States in the Wall Street Journal. Very good focus that most Democrats haven't even thought about. Open borders, unrestrained spending, supports for teachers' unions when they're acting antithetical to the interest of our kids. An obsessive focus on climate change, bashing the police, being against Israel, the dominance of identity politics. All of this has caused Democrats in this country to lose support from demographic groups, independent of Donald Trump, although Trump has taken advantage of that. Imagine if the Republicans were losing support from interest groups that had long been a bedrock of their electoral success. Imagine if the reverse were happening, how much the media would cover. This is a massive story. Democrats losing support from voters of color, from younger voters, massive. Now, Trump is singular. All these other industrialized democracies, they have the same issues. But what's different is they haven't found their version of Trump. There have been kind of poor man's versions of Trump, but they haven't succeeded. They haven't had Trump's skill. They haven't had Trump's level of aggressiveness, tough enough and determined enough to take on the old order. So what's happened to these other countries with their left parties, their equivalents of the Democratic Party, is they're weaker than they were before, but they're not crushed. They haven't declined as precipitously, in most cases, the way the Democratic Party has, who is now as low as they've been in poll after poll. I'm thinking about this stuff, and I talk to some Democrats who are, but very few prominent Democrats, whether you're talking about people in elective office, you're talking about activists or writers or people in think tanks, they're not even vaguely grappling with this problem in public. Why? Because they fear that the activist left will push them out of the party or cancel them. And because most of them lack the creativity and self-awareness that's required to say, how did this happen? How far back has this been going on? Some of these trends go well before Donald Trump's rise. When the few Democrats do tepidly and timidly put their toe in the water and say, what have we done wrong? They do it in a way that doesn't really give voice to a full analysis of what's happened and what needs to happen next. Because they're afraid, as I said, of being canceled by the left. They're afraid of being out of step with the activist wing of the party. So, Neera Tanden, a liberal, advisor to Hillary Clinton, advisor to Joe Biden, one of the smartest people in the Democratic Party, in my experience, very knowledgeable. She wrote an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal, not in the Washington Post, not in the New York Times, but in the Journal, conservative editorial page. And she admitted that the Biden administration that she was part of, a big part of it in advising on domestic policy, screwed up on the Mexican border. And she called for comprehensive immigration reform. She rightly in her piece put in sharp relief all the unpopular elements of President Trump's immigration policies, because some of the things Donald Trump has done are unpopular on the border. But she also felt compelled to call for a path to citizenship for some of the people in this country illegally. That is known by many Americans as amnesty. And she criticized other elements of what Donald Trump has done to try to stay on the good side of her liberal wing of her party. If the Democrats can't figure out how to lead with being tough in 2028, and whoever the Republicans nominate, whether it's Vance or somebody else, they'll make mincemeat of the Democrats. In Trump world, they laugh at how, even now, even after Donald Trump's victory in 2024 was clearly fueled in large part by immigration, they laugh at how much the Democrats still don't have a clue on immigration and a range of other issues. Then you think about New York City and the nomination by the Democrats of Mr. Mamdani to be their mayoral candidate. The reaction to that, again, reveals how clueless far too many Democrats are about what his election would mean for their brand. Republicans are salivating at the notion of having Donald Trump be able to run against Mamdani and campaign against him if he's the mayor of New York City. Now, there are people in Trump's orbit.
I look different. I play different.
Boxing's the wild west of sport. This isn't a normal world. Winning doesn't happen by accident. Winning becomes a lifestyle. Volleyball here is a state treasure.
Representing Nebraska has meant everything to me.
We were the greatest defense ever to play the game.
We've given them an opportunity to dream.
This ball represents a cashback card that charges annual fees.
Get out of your annual fees.
Who don't want him to win because they think he'd ruin the city, and some of them have pretty big investments in New York. So there's cross pressure there. But on the left, they continue to not grapple with what it would mean to elect someone with Mamdani's background and stated positions on the economy and law enforcement, a range of other issues. There was an op-ed piece of the New York Times by a woman named Tressie McMillan Cottom. She argued that the opposition to Mamdani is based pretty much solely on his racial heritage, rather than saying the fact that he's a socialist, okay? New York Post story this week talked about how so many prominent people in the party, in the Republican Party, plan to make Mamdani the face of the Democrats. And then you have people like Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, the leading Democrats in Congress, both from New York City, Kathy Hochul, the mayor of New York, the governor of New York. They know how dangerous this is politically for the party. They're really worried about it. But except for the fact that none of those three have publicly endorsed Mamdani yet, they're frozen in amber because the base does not want to see them be outspoken against the nominee. And they're worried that he may win. But they're not doing anything, at least overtly, to stop his march to victory. Who can solve this for the Democrats? Who can speak out thoughtfully? I don't think that the current Democratic Party chair, Ken Martin, or the past party leaders, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, these folks are not well positioned to try to stop Donald Trump on his march to achieving more, or to do the other task that needs to be done in parallel, rebuild their party's brand, to try to come up with policies and ideas and messengers that could really make a difference, okay? Trump's going to continue to have success and failures. The Democrats may do very well in the midterms. They may well. But in each case where Trump may have failure, I don't think it has much to do with the Democrats having a capacity to affirmatively and assertively meet the moment, to rethink why voters are so down on their brand, to change their image on the economy, on social issues. Because based on all the available evidence, the Democrats actually, right now, are on worse shape than the polling suggests, because the polling is a snapshot of where we are. They're running out of time. Again, because of the nature of the midterms, because we don't know where the economy will be, we don't know what's going to happen with the Epstein story, it's possible that the Democrats will have a good 2026. But the Democrats I talk to are far less worried about 2026 than the midterms, because this history suggests that even weak, the party could still do well enough to take back the House. What they're worried about is 2028. What they're worried about is the capacity of the party to redefine itself and to win back voters they'll need to win the White House, particularly because they are a party right now without strong candidates. The Democratic brand on its own right now, it appears to be on the wrong side of both the polling and of the history. And that's a big problem. It's a big problem to be on the wrong side of polling and of history. You think back to where did this start to go wrong? As I said, some of these trends have been around forever. But what's to me, and talking to the smartest Democrats I know, what to me is their biggest concern is not the history, but the future. How can they fix this when so many of the dynamics on social issues, teachers' unions, the economy, immigration, government spending, relationship with NATO, on so many of these issues, there's no reflection about where things went wrong. And it's very hard for Democrats to criticize Donald Trump and praise him, because if you give him any praise, think about in the first term with the Abraham Accords, ask any Democrat privately, what do you think of the Abraham Accords? Privately, they'll say fantastic. Ask them what they think about shutting down the border. Most of them will say, great, huge accomplishment. But in our polarized red-blue America now, it's very hard for either party to praise. And you take heat from the base if you praise Donald Trump, and they're worried about what Donald Trump would do with that praise. But a realistic appraisal shows that Democrats are not getting on the right side of these issues. We're on the wrong side of public opinion, the wrong side of history. These other industrialized democracies, their liberal parties, have survived because they haven't faced Trump. And I'll say again, if you think Trump is a bad political athlete, you're making a mistake. Trump has lots of unpopular policy positions, but he knows how to mitigate them better than the Democrats know how to mitigate theirs. And he fights to get on the right side of issues when he's on the wrong side. Democrats, for instance, are counting on being on the right side of Medicaid and Medicaid spending and people on health care. Trump's not going to sit back passively and be on the wrong side of that. He'll do whatever he can, as much as he needs to change. The Democrats have not shown the same level of awareness, the same level of nimbleness. And so I say, again, this question, how did the Democrats go wrong? And there's plenty of other things we could list. We've talked about some of them here, trying to block Bernie Sanders from winning the nomination in 2016 and 2020, trying to keep Bobby Kennedy off the ballot, lawfare against Trump. There's a whole range of things that are kind of episodic that Democrats did, in part because of Trump derangement syndrome, in part because...
TDS. All right, guys. All right, I'm going to cut it there. I will see you guys tomorrow. Take care of yourselves.